All right, folks. So
Go ahead.
let me introduce Supriya Nair, who's going to be leading this conversation. Supriya is an editor with the excellent magazine The Caravan, which is one of the few magazines of narrative journalism that we have in India. She was previously a staff writer with Mint, and she writes about books, about publishing, about sports, about urban India, and her work has appeared in many journals all over. A couple of years ago, Samantha Shannon, fresh out of Oxford, signed a six-figure deal with Bloomsbury. And I love six-figure deals because they could be anything from 100,000 to 900,999. So I don't know which one it is. But Bloomsbury, of course, famously discovered the Harry Potter series and went on to publish them with some success. Really looking forward to what people are calling this year's most remarkable literary debut. And over to the two of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Will you let me know if you can't hear one of us at any point of time? You will. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Samantha Shannon, the young author of what is indeed a remarkable debut novel, The Bone Season. Let me take you into the world of the novel. Imagine that the year is 2059. We are in a London that is fundamentally unrecognizable in some respects to us. Running through its streets is a 19-year-old who is an operator for a mysterious crime syndicate. Our heroine is a clairvoyant. She has, in the marvelous phrase employed by DC Comics, metahuman powers. As the book progresses, we're about to find out just what she can do, and the fact that she happens in a world of a great many powerful people. She, this young, apparently inconsequential girl, has a very special power indeed, perhaps more than one. While trying to escape the wrath of the powers that be, because this is a world ruled by a mysterious power, she happens, over the course of the novel, to fall in deeper and deeper into a world that she doesn't understand, and we are swept along in the journey with her. Samantha, for my first question, I want to ask you, what is a molisher?
A molisher. Well, a molisher is, I use quite a lot of slang in the book, which is from the 19th century. A molisher is where the term gun moll came from, as in the kind of Bonnie and Clyde, sort of a woman who spends her time with a gangster of some kind. So.
The kind of woman we all want to be.
So that's kind of, the term molisher is the kind of, the term that came before gun moll existed, pretty much. And it was used in the 19th century. It kind of has an implication of prostitution to it, but kind of that meaning was lost over time.
And what is a bone season?
Well, the bone season has two meanings. It means bone as in death and skeletons and, you know, depressing, morbid things. It also comes from the French word for good, bon. So it kind of refers to the good season as well. And in the book, it's essentially a harvest of human beings. And I won't say any more because I'll spoil it. But
Yes, I should warn you before we proceed, this discussion will contain spoilers. It gives me such great pleasure to say that because that's not a warning you usually have to put up front at a session at Jaipur. So, you know, at sort of opposite moments, if you could just like put your fingers in your ears and, I don't know, sing to yourself or something. The reason I asked you about these two terms at random, I could have picked a great many others, is to give people a sense of how extraordinarily rich and dense the world of this novel is. You take us into a UK of the future, but it's not exactly a future that we might imagine if, say, our worlds had fundamentally diverged in 2014. This is a world where a rift between any present that we might recognize and the future in which the bone season occurs has occurred much, much before. You're taking us into a London that is both neo-Victorian and not, a London that is dystopian in the tradition of, you know, the best mid-20th century science fiction, and yet not. So I want to ask you about what you can tell us about the world of this novel and how it came into being for you?
Well, the world kind of began when I was working in London as an intern to a literary agent, who is now my literary agent. And he works in a part of London called Covent Garden, which is famed for its market. And there is a very small part of Covent Garden called Seven Dials. And it's where 7 streets come together at a junction. And while I was working there, I became really fascinated by this area. And there's lots of kind of new age stores that sell crystal balls and tarot cards and offer psychic readings and that kind of thing. So I became kind of intrigued by the idea of creating a clairvoyant society, which I hadn't really seen done on kind of an extensive level in a book before. I mean, obviously you've got magic systems, you've got witches and wizards, you've got dragons and kind of that kind of thing, but I'd never seen a book that completely kind of created a society of clairvoyant people. One might exist, but I hadn't read it.
Right.
So I think one of the best things you should do when you write a book is write a book that you would love to read. So
yes.
That's kind of what I set out to do. And originally I kind of had the idea of setting the Bone season in the present day. But then I suddenly thought of this idea, what if this was an alternate history novel that was set in the future? So I chose a real event that happened in 1859, which was a massive solar storm. And I kind of suggested that this was actually something that wasn't just a solar storm, it was a rift between worlds. And I thought that it would be really fun to write a futuristic novel that had used an alternate history. So that's kind of what I set out to do, and I thought, okay, if this event happened in 1859, then why don't I kind of create a Victorian atmosphere?
Right.
So, and it's kind of like, I guess with steampunk is the nearest genre, because steampunk kind of inserts futuristic technologies into the Victorian era.
Right.
And I was kind of doing reverse steampunk in a way. I was inserting Victorian clothes and food and kind of the general sort of Victorian things into the future.
Yes.
So yeah, kind of like reverse steampunk.
Yeah, when I started to read The Bone Season, I thought, oh, this is like sort of pleasant, wonderfully neo-Dickensian, but I feel like Dickens isn't in fact the best author to cite as an influence. Perhaps there's something a little bit more, indeed, exactly mid-19th century and Gothic about the world. So The Bone Season, when it opens, is set in a universe where 200 years of this alternate history have already passed. So in some ways the aesthetic is indeed very steampunk. So you have people sort of in top hats, which to me is like the ultimate in signifying neo-Victorian, a neo-Victorian aesthetic. What else can you tell us about this in particular, and the fact that it draws from that you're drawing a parallel history, but also a parallel future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
aesthetically, I'm kind of interested in that.
I mean, it's good that you cite Dickens, because I mean, Dickens actually wrote about Seven Dials in kind of a journalistic fashion.
Yeah.
And I had no...
Kind of a nasty neighborhood in his time, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting neighborhood, because when it was created, it was supposed to be a very exclusive district, like Covent Garden, but inevitably it became a slum. And now it's kind of returned to its original purpose, and it's quite an exclusive sort of shopping district.
Right.
So aesthetically, I kind of wanted to combine aspects of what Seven Dials is like now with that kind of slightly sort of underworld, gritty feel that it had in the Victorian era. So Paige, who is the main character, she has a boss called Jackson, and he kind of bring those two things together.
Right.
He's very, he wears waistcoats and cravats, and he's very kind of dapper, but he's also a very kind of cruel, calculating, sort of really like a crime lord.
He is. And we won't tell you what exactly he's called very cleverly, because that constitutes a spoiler. So one last question about clothes. What do you envision Paige wearing?
I picture her wearing kind of like a page boy hat with a peak, kind of like one of those old-fashioned newsboy hats.
Yes.
Yeah, little kind of like blazers, trousers, boots. So it's kind of like kind of a neo-Victorian thing. That she wouldn't be wearing like a Victorian dress.
Right.
It would be more of a kind of Oliver Twist sort of look.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and you are about to give us more. The Bone Season is the first book in a planned 7-book series, which I think places it in an enormously challenging position. because you've had to build an entire universe
Yeah.
in what is essentially sort of the pilot episode of your season.
Yep, yep.
Can you, and I find it interesting that you take chances with the structure of this book. The regular way to start, to kick off, a long series, as I see it, is kind of to, set the stage, introduce every character, make us care about these people sort of from the very get-go and perform something slightly linear. In the Bone season, Samantha disregards this to some extent by taking us sort of back and forth in the histories of certain characters' lives by withholding and foreshadowing, and in a lot of ways following techniques that we associate with literary fiction, with crime fiction perhaps in some senses, rather than with a genre that demands a certain amount of straightforward world building. Would you like to talk a little bit about developing the structure?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I guess you sort of also mentioned world building, and it is incredibly challenging to write a book that involves a big world, because you have to let the reader know what kind of world they're getting into without completely overwhelming them with information. So in my first chapter, I do quite a lot of, I kind of had to, by necessity, do some kind of exposition, because it was very difficult. A lot of people will advise you, if you're writing a book, start off in media res and kind of just throw the character in there.
That's right.
I honestly think if I'd done that, no one would have had a clue what was going on, because it was just, the world is so different and it does need some explanation. So with the first chapter, I kind of used it as a slight guide to learning the world. Which was quite a risky thing to do, because some people get turned off by information when they're reading, and they don't necessarily want to have all that information put on them, but other people will like it. So it was quite a risk, but I thought it was better overall if the reader had a good understanding of what they were getting into at the beginning, and then after that I wouldn't have to keep explaining different terms so much. Yeah. The structure as well, I do use flashbacks in the book. I wasn't sure whether to do that originally, and there is a reason the character has flashbacks, which, spoiler. So I thought it was a good way to do it, because the main character is very quickly dislocated from her original setting in London, and she's taken to a dystopian version of Oxford. And it was kind of difficult doing that, because she's learning a lot about the world. And you also, when the book starts, she already knows that she's clairvoyant. She knows about her own gift. And I kind of had to, again, get that across to the reader without her just kind of telling them. Yeah. So I had to use flashbacks to show how she first found out about her clairvoyance, and what her history is like, where she came from. So I think it seemed eventually like a good structure to use.
Yes. I have to say that Samantha's version of a dystopian Oxford, where young people are taken in and brutalized and made into things other than they are, seemed to me to be quite an allegory for undergraduate college life. Congratulations on a very compelling portrait of what university is like for a lot of people.
Thank you.
You draw on two places that are already sort of immensely richly imagined, both London and Oxford. Are these places for which you have sort of a tremendous affection?
Yeah, Oxford was, obviously, Oxford has been explored by many, many writers, both sort of from Alice in Wonderland to kind of The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, and I was aware of that before I started. So I deliberately avoided reading Pullman, because I felt like I didn't want to encroach on his Oxford. I wanted to be completely unaware of his Oxford before I started.
Which is also, incidentally, like a kind of neo-Victorian,
sort of like a steampunk,
early steampunky Oxford.
Yeah,
so very different from yours.
Yeah, so I completely wanted to just avoid that and to create my own Oxford. I guess Oxford for me was a natural choice for the book, because it's a city of contradictions. I feel that it's a city. It's both at the forefront of science, but it's also full of kind of archaic traditions, and
yes.
It was also great for designing a city that was kind of frozen in time, because all the buildings are from different eras, and it was pretty much perfect for creating the world I wanted to. And another thing I used quite extensively was at Oxford we kind of used to say, the Oxford bubble, as in you kind of feel as though there is no outside world when you're there. You're in this agonizing cycle of going to the library every day and doing absolutely nothing else. So that was, I kind of drew on that on a more literal level and literally cut off Oxford from the world. So,
Yeah, you did. To the outside world, it seems like the Oxford of 2059 is a ruin, burned out, a burned out shell. Whereas when we go into Oxford with Page, we discover that it is in fact the seat of something much older and much more sinister. Even much more sinister than, kind of the Orwellian government that runs the world in which Page lives, a world in which people like her are outlawed and repressed.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about having? Let's talk about genre a little bit. I've seen your novel described as fantasy. To me, it read sort of more straightforwardly, like sort of the kind of dystopian science fiction. Closer to Orwell, perhaps, than to Asimov. So I think it kind of fits uneasily into some of these.
Yeah, I mean,
are you a big reader of science fiction?
I mean, I have quite strong feelings on genre generally. I mean, I don't particularly like genre as a categorization system. I've never really liked it. I mean, the way I see it, the novel itself was a hybrid of several forms. It came from experimentation. Writers like Defoe and Samuel Richardson were the kind of the pioneers of the novel, but they pieced it together from many other types of literature, pamphlets and kind of shorter bits of writing before it was given the name novel. And I think that genre is something that discourages writers from that mindset of experimentation. I think that writers will now feel the need when they write to agents, for example, just to label it, this is a romance, this is a sci-fi novel.
That's right.
And I think that although that is a perfectly reasonable way to categorize books, I don't think it should be a blueprint for how we decide what books to publish nowadays. And I think there is a slight risk that when a genre becomes very popular, that it's going to kind of create writers that want to write, kind of cookie cutter novels that are very similar to that in order to emulate the same success.
That's right. That's in fact directly true of a label that is applied to your novel. That of young adult.
Young adult is interesting because it's an audience novel, technically speaking. An audience categorization.
That's right.
It's kind of suggesting somewhere between the ages of 12 and 18. It's often debated which exact ages, but that's the general range.
That's right.
But young adult in itself has become a genre, which is very interesting. You can see certain character types and certain things that happen across YA novels, even if they're very different genres. So that again is kind of something that makes the Bone season quite difficult to categorize because it kind of crosses over both young adult and adult.
It does, that's true. And we were talking about this earlier, the fact that Paige, your heroine, is 19 rather than 14 kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. To me, genre, so I'm a little bit sort of more tolerant of these categorizations than you are because I feel like there's something useful over there to be seen, for example, in the production of such work.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I find, for example, that science fiction work, young adult works, tend to be produced sort of with more openness to collaboration, to community. Things like that.
There's absolutely. I'm not at all saying that I completely reject genre. I'm wary of its influence on writers' mindset of experimentation, and I worry that now. I mean, when the novel was invented via experimentation, like I said, I think that would someone dare to do that now? Would someone dare to create a whole new literary form for fear of it being perhaps rejected as being too strange or not fitting into a category? But having said that, genres are also great in bringing readers together, and that, of course, how else would you classify books in a bookshop? Because, how else would you help someone navigate their way through a bookshop?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's, I suppose, as long as it's useful in that sense, we're good.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself reading a lot of sort of science fiction and?
I was a very big fan of Isaac Asimov as a kid. I loved his robot stories.
Yes.
I'm woefully behind on anything sci-fi or fantasy because I've been studying sort of English literature for the past 3 years, so I'm more full of Shakespeare and other things like that. But,
and some of the sort of hyperliteracy does come through in the Bone season as well. I was very amused that Paige's fake supervisor is called Bill Bunbury.
Oh yeah.
Which is a reference, of course, to the importance of being honest. Sorry, where were we? Oh, we were talking about what you like to read.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much read anything as a kid. One of my biggest influences for the Bone season was Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
And that novel introduced me both to dystopian literature as a genre, which I hadn't really been aware of before, and also to feminism. So it was a very kind of milestone book for me.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely, I did think of it more than once as I read The Bone Season, but I didn't want to bring it up because I thought, you know, I mean, they both exist in very different worlds, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to hear you say that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the writing of this work. You started writing it when you were even younger than you are today, hard as that is for many people to imagine. You started while you were still at university?
Yeah, I studied it in my second year of university. I did the internship where I first encountered Seven Dials in July 2011. And I spent 2 weeks there, and then I went and wrote the book pretty much straight away. I finished it
How long did that take you?
About 6 months to do the first draft. I finished it in early 2012. I then visited Ireland, and I kind of had to rewrite the manuscript because I got so inspired in Dublin and Belfast that I had to go and just include more scenes about Ireland. So.
Okay. That's interesting on a number of levels. And I want to ask you about one of them, which is, you know, about the plotting of these 7 books that you have planned.
Yeah.
Are they sort of more or less a complete universe now, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I've got the world completely mapped out in my head. I use something that I call the flesh and bones planning structure, so I kind of have the skeletal outline of all 7 books with all the important joints, and I know which settings I'm going for, I know all the important twists, but I do leave room for maneuver, because I often find that if you kind of, even if you want a character to do something, they sometimes just downright refuse to do it.
That's true.
And you have to kind of let them go their own way a little bit. So I leave room for maneuver in that sense. But yeah, I leave room for the characters to kind of move around and flesh themselves out. But I know where I'm heading.
Right. And so it's interesting that, you know, sort of fortune took you to Ireland, where one of the most disquieting flashbacks of the Bone season takes place. How much more of this world and its history do you think we'll see? The Irish episode, for example, does have
it does have historical
undertones, historical undertones. Are we going to see sort of the universe of the Bone season expand?
Yes, I mean the historical aspects of it. So I sometimes get asked, like, you know, you're writing a futuristic novel. Are you intending to say something about the future? And it is difficult because the Bone season is a fantasy novel, and, you know, I'm obviously not saying that, you know, clairvoyants are going to be running rampant in the year 2059, or maybe I am, I don't know. But I'm not saying that, but I'm kind of more saying how the past affects the future. So I often do try and put in historical precedent, like the Ireland scenes are very inspired by the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland and the conflict between Ireland and England.
Right. Spoiler: there's a lot of rioting in this book.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of more what I'm trying to say, as opposed to making a comment on the future.
Right. You wrote, it seems now, a blockbuster before it was even published. And I imagine that one of the consequences of being the young writer who has sort of 7 books in mind, of which 3 books are, you know, part of a deal with Bloomsbury already, and involves, you know, sort of plenty of money and so on and so forth, is having to take on a lot of work that isn't necessarily just sitting down and writing.
No, it's one of the funny aspects about being a writer, actually, is that you have to do a lot of, you know, promoting the book and traveling, and that's wonderful in one sense, but also I think writers, we're naturally quite introverted people, which is why we dedicate our whole lives to sitting in a room by ourselves, kind of trembling at a keyboard.
That's right.
So it's definitely, it was hard for me initially because, you know, I was very introverted, and suddenly you have to kind of become a performer. And, you know, if somebody had said to me a few years ago, oh, you're going to be sitting in Jaipur doing a literary festival speaking to a massive audience, I would have cried and run the other way in terror. You know, but now I am still slightly terrified of you all. I'm sorry, but but I'm kind of, now I've learned to do it, obviously, and it's really good fun.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a kind of a contradiction.
And I think one of the things that it does is echo the experience of what a lot of writers of science fiction and young adult fiction have, either online or sort of, in an earlier era in text, which is sort of having a real community of readers and fans who are very, very closely engaged with your work.
Yeah, and that is the wonderful thing about literary festivals, about conventions and anything like that, is because you can see your readers and you can interact with them.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, that's a wonderful thing. It's wonderful to have someone say to you, your novel got me through this, or just anything like that is just really exciting.
Right.
And it's something we didn't have, many years ago.
That's right.
And also, you can create fandoms as well, and you get people. It's lovely to see two people that have read your book talking to each other, for example, and exchanging ideas about it. Because my view on books is that every book isn't just one story. The Bone Season isn't just my story. It's hundreds of stories. Everyone who reads it will take something different from it, and that's what I absolutely love about literature.
That's fantastic. So are you okay with, people perhaps writing fan fiction about the Bone Season and putting it out online?
Yeah, I won't read it.
No,
because I think it's quite a strange thing, because I think if you read it, it's a very weird. I think it'd be a weird experience.
I imagine.
I think it would be quite strange. But
you're happy for other people to kind of come in and play in your world.
Yeah, I think fandom is a great thing. I love seeing fan art of the book, and seeing playlists people have made. I think it's great.
I quite enjoyed seeing the fan art of the Bone Season as well. There's some very handsome, very good-looking characters in there, I have to say.
I think that's more the artist doing a very good job.
Well, some credit to you. And of course, speaking of other people coming and playing in your universe, there's talk of a movie in the works.
Yeah.
So this world is clearly expanding. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? Are you going to be closely involved with that?
Yes, I was very lucky because the film, I sold the film rights in October 2012 to the Imaginarium Studios. It's a small British production company which is co-owned by Andy Serkis, who you might know as Gollum from Lord of the Rings. And that was really exciting because they wanted me to have consultation rights, which means that I could be involved in the film. And as far as I'm aware, that's quite a rare thing for authors to have. And it can be a very disturbing thought to just hand the rights over to someone. And, they could literally do anything with it. And it's definitely frightening. So it's very nice for me to have the consultation rights as a security. Mm-hmm. And it's just nice to know that they care what I think, and that they want me to be involved in the kind of the teamwork of creating the film.
Oh, but that's fantastic, and that so I'm getting the sense that you're going to be dwelling in this universe for quite a while.
Yeah, I think I am.
Yeah, are you going to be writing the next 6 books over the next 15 years? Isn't that what George R.R. Martin has been doing?
I hope it won't take that long. But then again, George R.R. Martin has got a fantastically detailed world, so I don't blame him at all.
Well, so do you, I have to say.
They keep him very busy though. I actually met him at Adelaide, and he was being kept immensely busy. So I do not blame him at all for taking as long as he does. I hope the books will come out one every year. I've just finished.
That's very exciting for your fans.
Yeah, I've just finished the second one, so I think I should be able to do it. Fingers crossed.
Okay, yeah, yes, fingers crossed indeed. And have you had a chance to think about doing other kinds of writing or other writing?
I'm mostly focused on the Bone Season. I did actually write a short story for Vogue India. And they asked me to write a short story kind of set in an Indian city. So I actually wrote a story called Amrita, which is set in Jaipur. And it kind of uses Hindu mythology. And it was quite a daunting thing for me to write because at the time I had never been to India. So it was, I did say, I don't know if I can do this because I wasn't overly comfortable writing about, how do you get the atmosphere or anything like that. So, I was fortunate and I was able to do good research, and I had some, there were people there to check it for me. But it was actually really exciting to write because I feel like Western authors they're not often brave enough to move into Eastern territories when they write. Possibly because they're scared of getting something wrong, or just or they have my nervous feeling. I haven't been here. How do I write about this city? So it's. But I think it was really good fun, and it gave me it just added a kind of a whole new sort of aspect to the writing, kind of having that it was almost exciting not knowing and being able to create kind of a fantasy version of Jaipur.
Yeah, absolutely. Fiction, as we've heard more than once at this festival already, is basically the license to make stuff up.
Yeah, pretty much.
This is a very auspicious note, I think, on which to throw it open to the audience. So if you have questions, we can take a mic around and
Perhaps, should we perhaps like end with a little reading, you think?
We could do, I don't mind, yeah.
yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to pick, and the young lady in the orange. Can we?
Hi.
Hi.
You said your book is set in the future, but it's based on the Victorian era. So what got you to that idea? And that's pretty much it.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a combination of things. Like I said, I wanted to show how the past affected the future. So I kind of thought it would be interesting to take a past setting and use it to create a futuristic society. And I love Dickens, and I love that kind of atmosphere. So it was, in a way, it was kind of me just indulging my need to kind of create something and to create this imaginary world. And to kind of give it a colour and a flavour that was slightly different than just writing it in a sort of futuristic setting. And I think a lot of dystopian novels tend to use just pure futuristic settings, which makes them feel a little bit more sci-fi, I think, because they use, futuristic technologies and, futuristic medicines and stuff like that. And there are bits of that in the Bone season, but I also wanted to give it that kind of slightly gritty, slightly kind of otherworldly feel, and I thought that one of the best ways to do that would be to use the Victorian setting. So.
There was a gentleman there. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have one question. I wanted to ask, like you said, that there was a time when you really don't believe in genres, and I just had a question on that. I think what we have been seeing in the past few years, especially I suppose last 5 odd years, is that we're seeing a lot of Victorian. We're going back possibly in that era and in that so to speak atmosphere, taking back those characters. And the superhero is somewhere gone, like the archetypes and the hero, I think somewhere is kind of going away. So do you think that's here to stay, and like all these new themes that we are sort of going back to the Dickensian era like she mentioned, or we're going back to those, that kind of literature and sort of moving away from the popular archetypes and themes that we had.
Do you mean, are we moving away from sort of present day settings and?
Yeah, from the present, so like showing us a hero in the contemporary setting to something like going to a setting.
Like a sort of a parallel universe.
That's right.
The popularity of parallel universes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to be said for both moving away from the present day times and using parallel universes. I think one of the most exciting things about both things is that it just introduces a sense of possibility. And I remember when I was studying Emily Dickinson, she has a quote that says, I dwell in possibility, the idea that she's living in possibility. And I think that's what I find so exciting about literature. And when you move away from the present and you move to the future or to a parallel universe, it kind of breaks down the walls of reality. You're no longer constrained by the rules of the present. So, I mean, you could argue that fantasy does that generally, but if you don't want to create a whole new imaginary universe, like you might with, medieval fantasy like Game of Thrones, where somebody creates an entirely new universe. But if you write urban fantasy like I do, which is set in, the real world, even if it has fantasy layered over it, I think introducing something like a parallel universe or putting it in the future, that's where you can kind of move away from reality, but just without having to create a whole new reality. And I think it's just a really exciting thing, and I can completely understand why it's getting so popular, because it means you can introduce so many more interesting storylines.
That's true. There's someone in the front row. It isn't working.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about other writers in the genre. For example, I was thinking China Miéville, and he's more for Potato Street Station and that series he wrote,
read
China
China
Mayville.
Have I read what?
China Medieval.
No, I
Rundown
haven't
then.
actually,
Oh, okay,
no.
okay, so he's more in the steampunk
Oh, okay.
genre, yeah.
I have heard of
And,
it. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I think the thing about China Medieval, perhaps that you might, find most in common with the Bone Season, is this vision of an alternate London. Kind of, and both of them actually, in spite of the fact that Samantha uses the word steampunk, I think both of them resist a lot of what we associate with conventional steampunk, in entirely different ways.
And I think there's this other book, I may be getting the title wrong, was it Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman? Where, I mean, it's
are
also
you Neil
based in
Gaiman
London.
fan? Are you Neil
It's
Gaiman
the
fan?
graphic novel. Yeah.
I've read Neverwhere.
And the whole thing
I-
about Shepherd's Bush Station actually having something below that. So I was thinking about the location of the city which has a history. So perhaps that sort of is another thing which you could sort of comment on. The importance of a city having a sort of a history that you can
Just
go back
the
to.
importance of London having a history that you could...
Yeah, I think London is a fascinating city, and I think, even though I knew that London has been written about so many times, I think it was Oscar Wilde that said, if you kind of get bored of London, you get bored of life. And it is a city that has so many layers of history, and it's even a layered city in terms of its actual structure. It's got so much underground as well as on top of it, and it's just a city that endlessly just calls for more stories to be told about it. And that's what I found so fascinating about it. And obviously Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere really draws on that, and you literally get the idea of people disappearing into the kind of the under London, which I found wonderful. And I've been privileged to meet Neil Gaiman several times, and I think he's a very talented writer.
Yes, there's someone over there who has... sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Your book series kind of has a coherence to the...
Sorry, we're having trouble hearing you. Can you
Can you
speak
hear
up
me
a
now?
little? Yes.
Yeah. Your book series kind of has a coherence to the Harry Potter series, right? Like a 7-book deal with Bloomsbury, and you have the supernatural and magical elements and set in London. So have you been inspired by the book series at all? Do you have any elements in your books that J.K. Rowling might have too?
I kind of hesitate to say I was inspired by Harry Potter. I think every fantasy writer is inspired by J.K. Rowling to some extent, just because she created such a wonderful, complex, detailed world. And I think every writer aspires to be like that. And I was a huge fan of J.K. Rowling as a kid. I know that I've kind of been given this title, Next J.K. Rowling, by some publications. And although it's kind of nice to be compared to her in any capacity, I think if you say that there's a new something, it kind of suggests there's something wrong with the old one. And that we don't need a new J.K. Rowling, because the original is fantastic.
The old one's working just fine.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the original. So, I'd rather be the first Samantha Shannon.
But did you ever, while you were getting this book to the press, did you ever get any sort of well-meaning advice to make your heroine a hero, or to put your own name in initials, as J.K. Rowling was told?
No, I didn't actually. No, I think to be honest, I wouldn't have. I don't think that. There's been so much popularity for books that have a female lead at the moment. I don't think I would have needed to do that, and I wouldn't have considered it, because I think we need to continue writing literature where we have independent kind of young female characters.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I feel like thank you, yes. I feel like the Bone Season draws both from sort of the relatively recent tradition of, the kick-ass female hero, and an older tradition of kind of, self-willed, independent women. Indeed,
I think
more than one book reviewer has mentioned Jane Eyre. In relation to the Bone Season. So I think we do have a pretty strong tradition, and the Bone Season belongs firmly in at least some of those categories.
Having said that, though, I think there's this word "strong female characters" goes around quite often, and I think although I think it's great that we have female characters driving these books, I think we also need to remember that there's several different ways to be strong. We shouldn't just write strong female characters that are really like kick-ass and they can do loads of different things. There's many types of strengths, and I think that we never say strong male character. I never get say, gosh, what a strong male character you've written, because we assume assume by default that male characters are strong. And I think, you know, we need to, that's also a problem with male characters in a way. We need to have strong male characters that aren't necessarily kind of brawny action heroes. And we also need to have strong female characters that have, you know, a wide range of different things they can do. And, you know, Paige is strong in some ways, but she's also very vulnerable. You know, she has moments where she's vulnerable and naive. And yeah, I think the important thing we need to do is just think of our characters as people first and foremost, which I think George R.R. Martin said that when someone said to him, you know, how do you write these strong female characters? And he just said, well, I just think of my characters as people. Women are people. Right. Which I thought was great.
Yes, indeed. And there is a diversity of, you know, sort of female characters even within this one book. So I think you're right, representation is important in this as much as anything else. Do we have other questions? Yes. We can't hear you, sorry.
Is your main character Paige's personality based on anyone you know or admire, or is it just out of your imagination?
No, it's not really. I mean, it's certainly not based on me, because I'm not in any way kick-ass. But I mean, she's definitely a lot more kind of headstrong than me. And you know, Paige is the kind of person that will just punch a guy in the face who's 2 foot taller than her, and she's okay with that. I wouldn't do that personally, but that could just be me being boring. I live vicariously through her. But I mean, I think you do inevitably bring aspects of yourself and your experience to characters, especially when you're writing from their perspective, because you're in their head. But no, she's not specifically based on anyone I know, because I think I would be slightly wary of doing that. Because, I mean, if you had a character who was based on your best friend, for example, you might not want to kill them off. You know, it feels like, I think it would feel like the character wasn't totally yours. So I try to make her, you know, her own person with her own personality and her own interests as much as possible.
I think we've time for one more question, if anyone has one. Yes.
Can you hear me?
You'll have to switch it on.
Yeah, so from the beginning when you first started writing the book, did you choose to base the story in London?
Did you choose to base the story in London? Did it originate from
In London? Yeah, no, well, you know, obviously I got the idea when I was in London, so...
And if not London, where would you have based it? Like,
if not in London?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I mean, there's lots of cities I want to go to as the story goes on. Paris, maybe, or maybe Stockholm in Sweden. But you know, there's so many different places, and there's so much world to choose from. You know, it really could go anywhere.
Lovely. Okay, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Samantha Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, announcements.
Thank you, Samantha. And I've just been told that you're number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. So congratulations on that. And years from now, when you're filling out stadiums, we shall fondly remember the time you came to Jaipur. So thanks for being with us. And thanks to all of you for being a patient audience. Have a good night.